In this lesson, we're going to extend what we know about functions by adding one concept to them. To get started, open up the Round 1 folder and find the function variables lesson and open up run.py. We're starting with the code that we finished writing in the last lesson where we talked about loops. In the end of that lesson, we tried to change this function to move forward 500 steps instead of 100 steps, and we changed all these places where the number 100 was placed explicitly inside of the code. What we're going to do is learn a way to make functions more general. So instead of having to decide whether it's 100 steps or 500 steps and having to go back and change those functions, we're going to make that more of a choice, and I'll show you how. First, I'd like to introduce a method called main. We have to do this because we want to use something relatively special right now, which we're not going to talk about. You'll have to trust me again. But we're going to define a function called main with a special identifier called async in the beginning, which means this function is asynchronous, meaning it can stop and let things run for a while and then continue working. And then I'm going to move 100 steps forward command into that function. And this last line here that we won't touch basically calls the main function and makes sure that it runs. If we go back to the browser and open up the Round 1 folder and find the function variables lesson, you'll see that the car still moves exactly how we programmed it in the last lesson. There's nothing different just by the way we've organized the code right now. So how would we make this function more general? So instead of having the function move 100 steps forward, we can have it move any number of steps forward that we choose. If we adjusted the name, we would still have this number 100 inside of the code. What we really want this to do is to be our choice of a number here, which would alter the way this function works to exactly the number of times written in this variable. Most programming languages allow you to pass variables into functions, and that's the magic trick. So here's how we define that this function expects to get some value passed on to it, and then that value is assigned into this variable. I'll demonstrate, and that will help explain what I'm saying. Now we can say, I want to move 100 steps forward by writing the number 100 here. When we write 100 as the parameter for the move steps forward function, what happens is this number, once this function move steps forward gets invoked or called, the number 100 gets assigned into our choice of a number variable, which then gets used dynamically within the function. What this means is, as the computer starts executing this call, it gets to this line, it takes the number 100, and it assigns it to this variable, and then continues running. And so our choice of a number, when this method is called, will have 100 inside of it. Let's try that out. Let's see what happens. Let's go back to the browser and click refresh. Still moves forward 100 steps. Let's go back to the code now and change this to 300. Save it and then go back to the browser, hit refresh, and now we moved it 300 steps forward. Now you may be thinking, well, I could have changed the number over here. How is this useful? Well, the minute we start wanting to do multiple steps, like moving 50 steps ahead and then 100 steps ahead, now I don't have to write a new function. I can just change the parameter that I pass to the execution of the move steps forward function. This code doesn't change, and this allows us to generalize the idea of what this method does, this function does, from moving a predetermined number of steps to the number of steps I'm interested in calling somewhere else. So let's refresh, and you can see that now the distance is the summation of 150 steps. To illustrate that a little bit more, and this is why we did this async magic here, is because I need to call the sleep function, which pauses the program and allows us to see how moving forward 50 steps and then 100 steps looks like. Let's refresh the browser and you can see the movement happen there. And we can add more of these by saying, I now want to move 20 steps in the end. Save and go back to the browser, hit refresh, and there we go. We just made a more general function here of moving forward by introducing a variable which holds the value that gets passed to the function somewhere else. Now keep in mind, much like all of the different lessons in round 1, we're going to expand on many of these topics in round 2. Right now I want you to grasp the main concepts here, just enough for us to build up our understanding of how programming works. Okay, let's move ahead.